This has rocked the marketplace, the debate over payment for order flow coming into relief, if you will, or high relief in this whole situation around GameStop and what that conversation's created. But curious what you thought of and whether you believe right now it really is on the table. Has there been communication between your firm and the SEC over payment for order flow?
Yeah, look, undoubtedly, it is on the table. When Gary says something like that, Chairman Gensler, it's for sure. And, you know, in my heart, though, Andrew, and, you know, I've got a lot of experience at the SEC, I think they're going to take a deep look at this issue. I think they have to, by law, go through a very arduous process, right? They have to go through notice and comment rulemaking. They have to take comments in. They have to study this issue. And when they do that, and this will take time, but when they do that, they're going to arrive at the conclusion that payment for order flow is undoubtedly an amazingly good thing for retail investors, and they're not going to ban it. So I think we're going to go through a process here. We look forward to engaging with the SEC, with Chairman Gensler and his staff on these issues. But I think that the overwhelming evidence that we see is that payment for order flow is so good for retail investing. And from our perspective, at Robinhood, it's the lifeblood of no commission, no minimum balance brokerage. This is what has brought in a whole new generation of investors, millions and millions of investors.
Speak to this issue, though. When we've talked to Ken Griffin at Citadel and the CEO of Virtu on the other side, both of whom provide this service of payment for order flow, do you believe, as apparently Gary Gensler does, that your customers are not necessarily getting the best possible price they could?
I think we're getting excellent prices for our customers. I think our execution quality statistics prove that out. I think you've heard Doug Sifu very convincingly and clearly show the numbers, which clearly lay out that the price improvement for retail customers when using wholesale market makers is much better than you'd get on exchanges. So, you know, again, I think the overwhelming evidence here is that the current market structure works well for retail investors.
If you're right, though, why do you think Gary Gensler's not just putting it on the table, but he has been pretty blunt about his view that there's a possibility that customers are not getting the, quote, best price? Now, best price is different than an excellent price. That's a separate component of this. And then the other issue on top of it is what kind of data firms like Citadel are really getting and how they may or may not be using that data. And, of course, we've heard from those firms saying they don't use that data. But nonetheless, Gary Gensler seeming to take the side of some of the folks on Reddit and others that have questioned that.
Yeah, look, on the data issue, you should know that the amount of data that the wholesalers receive as we send the orders over is very, very limited. It's very specific to the order being executed. And again, Doug Sifu, I think, would be the most clear on that issue so far, that they're not using data for any purpose other than to execute the order. And but look, it's a good issue. I'm not saying any of this is not ripe or interesting for the SEC to look at. I do think, Andrew, to go back to your first statement about this being related to GameStop, it's not related to GameStop. This is a false narrative, like so many other false narratives happen here in Washington, that somehow payment for order flow or gamification was the reason for the GameStop January 28th saga, right? You know, there was a false narrative about what happened on that day. There was a false narrative of collusion between hedge funds and retail firms like ours. When that was proven to be false, everyone moved on to something else that's been sitting around in the gadfly universe for years.
But clearly one of the issues is how much effectively the Citadels or Virtu are skimming off the top and what that really means to the customer. Now, it may very well be that that's still a good deal. You won't dissuade me from the view that it might actually be a very good deal. But how do you convince the public of that when there are going to be times where the customer is going to lose? It may be on the whole that everybody wins, but on a very micro level, it may be different, right?
Yeah, look, I think the customers, we need to be clear in our communications with customers about our protocols, right? The way we route orders has nothing to do with the amount of payment for order flow we receive. We charge the same to all the market makers, and we route our orders to the market center that's going to give our customer the best execution. And so, again, we need to be clear about that. But I think the notion of skimming off the top, what we're really talking about here, Andrew, is a spread, right? A spread between the bid and the ask, as represented by the NBBO, the National Best Bid and Offer. The market maker captures some. They give some of that to us in PFOF, and they give price improvement to the customers. And that's as old as time immemorial here.